Good day and welcome to Method A's training course on getting to know your musical symbols video number 3. I'm the CEO and caretaker here at Method A, Brian West. Today we're going to talk about the symbols that you may see within a musical composition that represents the beats that you hear, meaning each beat has a symbol. So the first symbol that we're going to talk about is one of the longest symbols that has been alive in music, and it is the maxima or the longa symbol. The maxima or longa symbol represents 8 beats. Now each beat also has a measure or a rest that goes along with this beat or this symbol, and you also see that on the screen as well. So now let's go down a notch to 4 beats. The quadruple whole note represents 4 beats within a musical composition or a musical piece. So when you see this symbol, that means that you have 4 beats going along with that measure. Now if you look at the symbol, it almost looks like, well, it looks like half of the longa or maxima symbol, which that represents 8 beats. So you're going half. Now let's go down another half, which represents 2 beats, or the double whole note, that or also known as the breve note, which represents 2 beats, known as the double whole note. So as you can see, we're going down every note. So we go 4 notes, we go 8 notes. Half of 8 notes is 4 notes. Half of 4 notes is 2 notes, which is the breve or double whole note. Now let's go down to 1 note, which is the whole note. So as you can see, out of those notes, there's 1 note that represents 1 note. So out of those 8 notes with the maxima or longa note, you have 1 note within those 8 notes, and that is known as the whole note. So when you put 8 notes together, then you have a maxima or longa note. When you put 4 notes together, you have a quadruple whole note. When you put 2 notes together, you have a double whole note. So now you're starting to see how these measures of music can be represented. Now let's take that 1 whole note and split it up into little bitty pieces of a sound that you get out of the instrument. Now let's take the half note. So 1 note cut in half is half note. So 2 divided by 1 gets you 0.50. So that's 50% of a note. So you only get a half of note. So we're chopping this note up. So now let's go down, and that's also known as the minimum note. So now let's go down to the crochet, which is the quarter note, which is 1/4. So you take a whole note, you take a little bit like 0.25 of it, and you get a quarter note, which is a quarter of a whole note. So to figure this out, all you have to do is take the bottom number, which is 1/4. 4 divided by 1, and you'll get 0.25. So if you take the half note, you take 2 divided by 1, you'll get 0.50. So now you're starting to see how this all comes together. You're just taking the sound and you're just minimizing it into little bitty pieces out of the 1 whole sound. So now let's take it down a notch where you have the 8th note, or 1/8, also known as the quaver note. So now you're starting to see how this comes together in a musical piece or a musical composition, where you have these sounds coming together and you have notes that are represented by 1 note, and you split those notes or you add on to that 1 whole note. So you take if you take an 8th note and you take the number 8 divided by 1, you'll get a percentage of how much of that note is left, or how much of that note is to be played. So now let's take it down to a 16th note, which is 1/16, the semiquaver. So now you're starting to see how these notes come together and how they represent 1 whole note, and how that 1 whole note can be split up into little bitty pieces. Now let's take it down a notch to the 32nd note, which is 1/32. 32 divided by 1, and now you're starting to see how the pattern goes on. So now we go down to the 64th note, which is 1/64. The pattern goes on. If you see the symbol, it lets you know how much of a note you're going down, and the symbols that are represented by flags lets you know that you're going down even more of a quarter of a note within that musical piece or that musical composition. So then you go down 1/128, 128. So that lets you know you have the 128th note, which is represented by the 1/28, and these notes have names. So now you can see how all this language comes together, where they've come up with names and ways to measure these notes so that you yourself can be able to play and understand how to read and put music together, so where it could be organized and understood. So 1/28, you take 128 and you divide it by 1. It'll give you a decimal point of a measure of how much you're playing that 1 note. So now let's take it down to another notch. So you go down to 200 to 1 over 256. So that is called the 256th note. So now you're seeing how this comes together, where they come up with names. Now this one is called the demi, semi, hemi, demi, semi, quaver note. So now you see how they come together to represent all these notes that you see coming from that one whole note, and you split that one whole note, or you add more notes to it. Now to do that, you also can add dots to these notes. So that means you can add a dot and a symbol to represent a measure of music as well. So say for instance, if you take a whole note and you put a dot next to it, that dot represents a half of a note. So one whole note with a dot next to it will equal one half of a note. So let's get a little bit more complex. Now let's say you took a half note and you put another dot next to it, and you get a whole note. So now you're starting to see how this comes together. Each dot represents a half note. So if you get a half note and you put two dots next to it, then you'll get a 1/2 note, because that one dot with the half note equals one note, and then another dot represents a whole note. So I'm sorry, a half and a whole note. So now you're starting to see how to kind of put these measurements together, and how you can get what you can out of a musical composition to be able to read and understand how to write and be able to compose your own musical pieces with those notes and those symbols, and how it can make sense to the reader and to the musicians who are playing. Now let's get to the beam notes. The beam notes are when you are trying to group these notes together, or these symbols, and so the musician, when they're reading and they see the beams connected to the notes, they know that these notes are grouped together when they're playing a musical composition. You also have the ghost notes. The ghost notes are what you hear in a musical piece, where the tune is rhythmic, but it doesn't necessarily have a discerning pitch. So basically what it's saying is that the musician is playing and he's adding extra sounds within the musical piece that make the piece appealing to the person who is listening to the music. So he may add a musical piece which is called a ghost note. So these notes are represented by the X, or with the symbol that you see on the screen, representing sounds that come straight from the feeling of the music that's being played. Now you also have the multi-measure rest. Now as I explained, the rest that you see going along with each symbol represents a time where the musician stops and then continues on with the music. But there's ways to measure a long rest or a short rest, and you'll see it by a solid bar line that goes across the stave, or you'll see it in a musical piece, letting the musician know how many bars to rest on within that particular piece of music. So this all comes together and gives you some idea of how music can make sense when you're reading it, and how to be able to play and read music, and how to be able to perfect the craft of being a good musician and being able to read and compose sheet music. I hope you got something out of this lesson. I want to thank you for tuning into our channel. Please don't forget to subscribe, and please visit our website, method8inc.com, where any donation over $10 gets you a free Method 8 product of your choice that we've worked on here at the Academy. I want to thank you so much for tuning into our channel, and I'm sorry, yes, takes notes, I did cheat. I am going to edit some more videos. Thank you so much for tuning into the Method 8 YouTube channel.